Welcome back to another episode of Comic Watchers. Comic Watchers is brought to you by Comic Watch. Comic Watch is your source for all your comics and media news and reviews written by fans for fans. I'm your host, Cody, coming to you from Honolulu, and here's the rest of our crew for today.
Hey, this is Matt coming to you from Edmond, Oklahoma, newly relocated. Hi, Brian.
This is Brian from Portland, still not fully unpacked.
And I'm Nicholas, coming once again from Carthage, Texas.
So we've got a pretty good show for you guys today. We're doing an all-indie show. We're going to be covering White Trees #1 from Image and Once and Future #1 from Boom. But first, Brian with the news.
Yeah, so last week I don't think I had hardly anything, and today I have 2 pages worth of news notes. So Jason Momoa got arrested in Hawaii. At least that's what clickbait sites will have you believe. He wasn't. It was a staged. He was part of the protest for. I'm probably going to mess this up, but Cody, you can jump in. You're in Hawaii. Momoa Kaye protest. Did I say that somewhat right?
Not even close, but it's fine.
Okay.
Mauna Kea.
Okay. I see that. But he wasn't. He's part of the protest. The protests are still going on, but he wasn't arrested. Cops were pretending to arrest him. Somebody posted it on social media, and all the clickbaits were like, oh, he got arrested. Now they're having to rewrite the article or update it and say that, no, he wasn't. It was staged, which clearly everybody in the picture is smiling. But, yeah. Okay, so the CW's big crossover event is going to be huge this year. Somehow we managed to get a list of everybody who's involved so far, or at least people who are confirmed. They tell us that there are going to be more entries in it. So, of course, we're going to have Team Arrow, Team Flash, Team Supergirl. We're going to have Batwoman, Lois Lane. We're getting 2 Supermen, Brandon Roth and, of course, Tyler H.
Hoechlin.
Yeah, whatever. That dude is going to be Superman. And then, of course, we have the Monitor, the Anti-Monitor, Black Lightning, and Kevin Connery, who has played the voice of Batman since the animated series. They said that he may actually be Batman in the movies or in the show. We'll see what happens. More is to come with that. We'll keep an ear out. Externals could bring back Thanos in the MCU. Don't do that. Nobody wants that. Or I don't want it. I don't know about all of you guys, but I wouldn't suggest it. Okay. So Robert Lenchard is a huge comic book fan. He fell in love with the X-Men and is currently selling all of his comics to pay his medical bills. He was first diagnosed with lymphoma, then was actually in remission, then received another illness, which led to cancer that has now spread to his lymph nodes. And unfortunately, that's. He actually has X-Men #1, and he is selling a bunch of his other comics. And you can go to ComicConnect.com to help pay his medical bills. Like I said, he's a huge fan of the X-Men and has a bunch of early year X-Men. I think I even saw a 3 and a 4 in this little pile. So definitely go out. It's just comic, nothing special about it. ComicConnect.com if you want an early X-Men book. He also says he's selling a bunch of other things. So I saved this last portion because at first I thought it was going to be a clickbait article. It wasn't. So CNS News wrote, comic book TV shows target kids with violence, profanity, sex, and drugs. Of course, they're talking about the live action, such as we're just covering with the CW. The article goes on and says kids are being traumatized or being traumatized by watching it. He kind of wants the shows to be more like Batman the Animated Series because that didn't have anything bad. It was age neutral, which actually wasn't. I actually heard on DC Daily when it first started, they did an interview with Kevin Connery, who voiced Batman it wasn't. It was actually made for adults. They made it into a lot of adult themes. And also, it goes on to say that children are severely harmed by graphic violence, profanity, sex, and entertainment, and comic shows should demonstrate how comics used to be in the 80s. Okay. So first off, the 80s comics, and this guy wrote it, is supposedly a comic book fan. I don't know how else to put this, but the 80s were pretty over-sexualized and a lot of violence. For example, like in Fantastic Four, you would see kids being hit. You would see a whole bunch of different things that kids probably don't need to show. So I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to open this up. Do we think that comic book TV shows targets kids of violence, profanity, sex, and drugs?
No.
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 Right.
In fact,
Article
I would.
on the family. Brian, who wrote this article or published it? I should say. I missed that at the beginning.
It's CNS News. I can tell you it's a conservative website.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just from the content, I can tell you it's
right.
Look, the target audience for these shows and the target audience for comics in general is not children anymore. We have well moved beyond that. Honestly, our age group, and to a lesser extent Nick's, is the actual target audience for comics these days. 30-year-old, dominantly white men. That is the target audience. Now they're working to expand that. What's that?
Sorry, I don't necessarily know if that's who the target audience is, because I do see a lot of diversity, but I do think that's who's buying it right now.
Well, they're certainly trying to expand on it, but the idea of marketing to children has always been somewhat of a mystery to me when you're working with television demographics, because there's no profit in children.
I think it was easier to say the audience was predominantly white male in the 80s and 90s. I think especially now it might be a tougher sell to make that argument because like Brian said, it is a lot more diverse now. I think if you were to take a screenshot of what's happening now currently between all these different publishers, it's hugely diverse. And I think these articles, like what we're talking about now, are in response to that shift. And it's just something that's going to happen from that type of outlet.
You're right. I should specify not necessarily the target audience, but the dominant consumer is still dominantly this generation's white males. It is diversifying, but I think that it's not a far stretch. It's not hyperbole to say that we are the dominant consumers. Go to any convention and look at the people that are actually buying comics at the convention, not who's there to see, the voice actors from My Hero Academia or, whatever. But the people actually buying comics look at like me and Matt and Nick. Like, it's just a fact.
Right. I think we all agree on that.
And I also want to say real quick, consider the source of where this came from. I did a quick 5-second cursory view of the homepage of CNS News, and it's basically Breitbart. It's nothing. It's a bunch of it's just propaganda. It's not news. It's just people stirring stuff up. It's a particular viewpoint that some people have, and it has to do with a fear of change. I don't think it's a coincidence that the casts of the shows that they're attacking, that they purport are so harmful, are incredibly diverse, and not just a bunch of white people hanging around in Archie Land or wherever, Riverdale, which has also gotten really diverse lately. But it's the forces of conservatism who fear change. They're saber rattling, and they're particularly dominant in the culture right now simply because they're loud and they're making the most noise. I can't take this type of article too seriously just because it's deliberately designed to stir people up that already believe that viewpoint. They're not looking for facts or news. It's opinion disguised as facts and news. And it's just, it does nothing but fan the flames of culture war. So, you know, to each their own, but I like my comic book shows. So leave them alone.
Very well spoken.
Yes. Yep, that's all I have for news this week.
All right. Well, that was fun. We could probably do a whole show on a topic like this.
More
to be fair.
soapbox.
More soapbox, please. Yes. So moving on from that, let's move into White Trees #1. This is a two-parter coming from Image Comics, written by Chip Zdarsky, art by Chris Anka and Matt Wilson. Is that right? Yes, that is right. This is a difficult book to get a grasp on as far as summary goes. It's half of the story of a trio of warriors from some fictitious nation set in a fantasy setting, you know, swords and dragons, etc. And their children have been kidnapped by agents of a foreign nation. The king has gathered them. He doesn't want to invade this foreign nation. He's sending these three warriors, Krylos, Davian, and Skatier. Davian is kind of like a big lion type mammoth man. Skatier, his lover, is an elf. And Krylos is kind of like, he's a retired warrior turned zenful farmer, humanoid Terran type warrior, right? So he looks like your typical like ranger, I guess, if we're talking in terms of like Lord of the Rings or whatever. I'm not a huge fantasy person, but so these three are on a quest to recover their lost children, and on the path to it, they walk through a forest of white trees where, you know, they encounter dragons, they encounter some sort of like phantasmal spirit creatures. I did have the chance to talk to Chip briefly before the show, and you know, my feeling on this is that it has a bit of a sense of this is a setup for this world, and there will be many more stories in this world. And he confirmed that he would like to do that. It's just a matter of timing and if the fans are interested in this. You know, if this thing doesn't sell, probably won't revisit it. It's a lot like Hellboy in that sense, structurally. You know, let's introduce it, but we're not going to give you like all the backstory. We're not going to give you all the nuance right away. You got to get into it and show us that you want it, and then we'll give you more. So with that said, Matt, what did you think of White Trees #1?
Well, to borrow a line that you use, Cody, it was a comic book. I didn't hate this. I finished it, and I don't know. It didn't do much for me. I'll grant you, I'm not a huge fantasy nerd. Not that nerd's a pejorative. Don't think I'm saying that. But I don't know, that it just lots and lots of setup. And then I got to the end of it and flipped to the back cover and said, wait, 1 of 2? Where's the other 3, 4, 6 issues of this? It just feels like you were saying, it's a lot of setup. I can't imagine that the second issue is going to particularly feel like it closes anything very well. That said, I mean, it's not a bad comic. It's an interesting setup, and I'm going to give it tons and tons of credit for having some just openly gay characters in this Not Warriors 3, and they're just there, you know? It's not a big deal. The ex-wife of one of them shows up at one point, and she's joking around with her ex-husband's boyfriend or lover, however you want to put it, about, God, how can you stand this guy? You know, it just, everything just flows really naturally, and I really appreciated that. I don't think there's just been a lot of examples of gay culture in the fantasy world. I might be completely off base on that. I don't know. I'm unaware of any. We'll put it that way. But I thought that was cool in and of itself. So they're off on a quest to retrieve their children at the urging of the king, who doesn't want to get in this war and is sending his these retired not warriors 3 into battle. I will be very, very surprised if it doesn't turn out that the king didn't kidnap the children and manufacture this entire scenario. It seems fairly well telegraphed. I think Chip Zdarsky is typically a better writer than that, but first foray into fantasy, so who knows? I did really dig the art from Chris Anka. He's come a long way. He first started showing up about 6-ish years ago on Bendis's X-Men tenure, and I didn't care for his art at all then, but this was really good, very moody. It fit the story well. The line work kind of it's deceptively simple, but packs a big punch, and the coloring was just beautiful. So we'll see where this one goes. Brian, what did you think?
It had lions, elves, and humans-ish. So, oh my. It had dragons. It had cool drugs. It had sex and everything else that you could want in a comic book. I agree with you. Matt, did you notice the different blues that they used?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The coloring, like I said, the coloring was fantastic. I had to double check that it wasn't Jordi Belair because that had very much her signature look to it, and nope. So yeah, kudos to them.
Yeah, how they use the different blues for the skin, from the sky to certain aspects of the room, whatever it was. I don't know why I noticed colors probably more than probably even the art. But the colors were awesome. I don't know if I understood the story. I just kind of read it in a hurry, but I read it and I like it, I think. So that kind of seems to be an issue because I'm not sure if I like it. And if you ask me if there was violence in it, I can't remember. So it can be, for me, it was kind of a forgettable book, but I thought it was a very cool book. And it's something that I probably want to hold on to, but I don't know if I like it or not yet. Cody, or I'm sorry, Nick?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I liked it a little bit more. I was a fan of this by the end of it. That being said, it does a few things different. I love how it takes on gender norms and especially the fantasy genre. And like you said, the art was fantastic and all of that. But is it enough to be half of a story? Is it substantial enough? And that's kind of, by the time I got to the end of it, that was some of my worry. But Cody talking that he had spoken some to Chip before and that he would be open to this, that makes sense in the world building that happens pretty early on in this. I get the sense that he wants to build on this a little bit more, and maybe this was an introduction into it. But a common complaint with Image Comics in general is that a lot of their series are television pitches that are turned into comics or something like that. And I thought this was interesting that it very much felt for the comic medium. It wasn't something that felt like it should have been a TV show and they just made it as a comic to try to pitch it. This was very much for the comic medium and it worked well with it. And kudos to Image for really pursuing that. But it's also something that we've seen online in webcomics culture. Like this type of story, we've seen a few times. So it's interesting to see it come into a more mainstream format and be on the shelves at your local comic store. Because I followed a few series like this that aren't exactly family friendly that you would hand to anybody, but they're telling really strong stories and they're using provocative themes to further the story. And the creative team knows this and handled it really well. And using the fantasy genre as a tool to explore those themes, I thought was great. And back it up with brilliant artwork. I just want to see more than 2 issues, really. So hopefully that happens. But yeah, big fan. Can't wait for more. Like, this is what I want out of fantasy right now. It's good stuff. Cody, what do you think?
There we go. My mute button just keeps getting stuck. It's really annoying. All right, so yeah, I was totally into this book. I'm not a huge, like I say, consumer of the fantasy genre. I was, much more when I was, 12, 13, 14 years old and reading all the Dragonlance books and whatever. But I've kind of shied away from it. And between this and Coda from Boom, that's been really kind of re-energizing that adolescent enthusiasm towards the fantasy genre for me. I thought this was gorgeous. I thought the storytelling was really solid in the space that they took to tell this story. I feel like the pacing was really good, the dialogue was sharp, the ability to flesh these characters out and develop them in, what was that, like 32 pages or so, I thought was really well done. I mean, Chip Zdarsky is an absolute rising star in this industry. Between this and, I mean, his Invaders right now, his Daredevil right now, like this guy is crushing it on a number of books. So if he's got like this germ, this seed of a entire world for a creator-owned project, like I'm on board for that. I really would like to see more out of this book. But if we're gonna get that, you got to go to your LCS and you got to go buy this damn book so that we can get more stories like this, because that is almost a fatal flaw in the comics industry right now. If it doesn't sell, you're not going to get it. So, especially when you're talking about projects that are coming from some of the smaller publishers, like they're doing everything they can to make overhead. So, Image isn't really a smaller publisher, but it is. If Marvel currently controls 40% of the market share and DC has 28, that doesn't leave a lot for Image, Dark Horse, Dynamite, Boom, IDW, a billion others. Like there's literally 15 to 20 comic publishers out there that are considered major comic publishers. So get out there to your LCS, check this book out. It's worth it. And don't be surprised you get about 2/3 of the way and there's dongs everywhere. And like I was just at Dragon's Lair in Mililani, Hawaii, one of our local shops, talking to the owner, and his fear was that he was into this book, and nobody's going to talk about anything but the dongs, just like Batman Damned all over again. It is more than the dongs, folks. This is great storytelling. This is great world building. This is sharp dialogue. This is gorgeous art. Go check it out.
Things are mightier than the penis. I promise.
So,
Hey, actually, something that did just occur to me, though, is, it's just 2 issues. And we all kind of had noticed the same thing, that this first issue is just a lot of setup. What if the real hook winds up being in issue 2? And something or other completely flips on its head, and that's really the hook that'll get people talking. I mean, it's purely speculative, but Chip Zdarsky's a canny enough writer that I think he might actually pull something like that. So who knows? Just talking.
I think that twist will definitely come from from his child. I think they're setting that twist up with the end. What they're going to explore with that is going to be super interesting.
Definitely. Our next book is Once and Future from Boom Studios. It is written by Kieran Gillen with pencils by Dan Mora. It tells the tale of the Arthurian sword. It has been possibly recovered in modern times, and a normal guy and his gun-toting grandmother are on a quest to to stop it from being recovered, because it turns out Arthur may not actually have been that cool of a dude. So, Brian, what did you think about this book?
I loved it. Like, I was actually really hesitant even reading it, but I thought it was a really good book. I love Gran. I love Granny. Like, she seems like this innocent, older lady that lives in a home that's just stubborn, but no, she surprises you, and she's taking you into a basement full of guns, and then you have a dragon lizard thing chasing you. What can't you like about it? I actually love the usage of pink and yellows in the book. Like, it makes it that much, you get more of the vibe from it. I don't know how to explain it. I love the relationship between Gran and her grandson. Their dialogue's hilarious. He's kind of a klutz, which makes him, that more likable. I check this book out. Go to your local comic book store, buy it on comicology.com. I don't care. Just get it, read it, and I think you'll probably like it. Nick?
Yeah, this book is coming in with a lot of hype, like coming in with 4 sellouts on the fourth printing now. There's a lot of people talking about it, and it's interesting that we chose two pretty strong fantasy stories to talk about, and they're really different takes on it too. So you have a more adult approach that explores these different themes in White Trees, but Once and Future takes this historical aspect and takes the twist and puts a prophecy on it that can be read either way, and that's classic storytelling. It's going to be a great story, and it's backed up with super great art. But reading them two side by side like this, I can't help but draw comparisons, and it makes me look at them up against each other. And it's most likely unfair to compare the two, but I think White Trees is an example of a bit more complex storytelling with more depth and character exploration in these world building themes. And Once in Future number one is still strong writing, but it's something that I feel like I have seen before in the fantasy genre. So there are a few twists in it that I feel like are clever elements in the story that are interesting that I like, but it's ultimately not something like White Trees where I'm running and telling everybody that you have to check this out and to go, this is the book that you need to buy, because these books are on the shelf right now. And as a reader, you're going to be looking at both of them. And if I'm standing there, I'm probably going to tell you to read White Trees before this book. And that's not to say Once and Future number one's bad. It's probably up a lot of people's alleys, and I can definitely appreciate that because it's pretty wild. Like, I read Harley Quinn. I'm super into all of this. It's not something that's a foreign concept to me, but reading them back to back like this, I just felt like it hit a few cliche tropes, I guess, however you want to put it, that I had just ultimately seen before. And it was still a lot of fun to read it because I'm a fan of the fantasy genre and the artwork was great in it. Once we got out of the introduction that had a lot of dialogue in it and it's bringing in Gran and all this stuff, once it happens, it really takes off, and I thought that was super fun. But ultimately, it's not something that I would probably continue reading, on into issue 5, 6, 10. But with only 2 issues of White Trees, I want more of that already. And I think that's a significant difference between the two that I just can't help but feel. And Once and Future number one, I guess it's not a bad book, but it's not something that I'm gonna rave about. And if it lives up to the hype or the expectations that it set for itself over the next few issues, it might be able to be remembered and be something upstanding in the fantasy genre. But I think it has an uphill climb right now. Okay.
Want to interrupt real quick? I completely disagree with everything that Nicholas just said. Just kidding. No, for me, I actually preferred Once and Future over White Trees, but buy both of them. I think they're both great. Cody, sorry.
Yes, I'm back after my computer decided to impromptu restart itself. I loved this book. I loved the other book. This is a good week for me. This book is a literary nerd's dream. And I say that because this takes all of the lore of the Arthurian legend. Artemis, can you... Okay. Yes. This takes all of the lore of the Arthurian legends. Hi, I've got a shadow. And subverts them. So this is turning the notion of Arthur as savior, that savior messianic trope, on its head. This sets Arthur up to be the bad guy. And I mean, logically speaking, if you look at all of the older texts, from Mallory, et cetera, White, Arthur is always poised to be the villain and never is. So I think just from that standpoint alone, just on the merit of that, you've already got me hooked. Like, I'm already in for a penny, in for a pound. The art was gorgeous. The book was structured really well. It has this great balance between light and dark. Like Gran is so sarcastic and so like if this were one of those TV pitches, she's Betty White with friggin' machine guns and fighting down questing beasts. And on the flip side, you've got, her grandson Duncan, who is an academic. He's a historian. He's us, all thrust into this world of false histories and false narratives and twisted expectations. Like, way to go, Gillen. Like, this book rightfully is onto its fourth printing 2 days after release. So I'm totally in for this book. I didn't hear what Matt had to say about it, but I assume Matt loved it.
Sucker! I didn't say anything yet.
You didn't say anything yet. Why am I on then?
I don't know. The natural order was subverted.
Matt, you're up.
So anyway, yeah, yeah, Nick, I don't want to be the hater and single you out or anything, but I'm on Team Cody on this one. He kind of took a lot of my points I was going to say. I love the subversion of the Arthurian legend because I'll be honest, when I first saw what this is about, here we go again, King Arthur, blah, blah, blah. No, that was I don't have as much of a literary background in this stuff as Cody does, but I think turning this around on its head and positioning him to be the bad guy was an excellent subversion of a well-worn trope. And as for the characters themselves, yeah, Gran was funny. Duncan, I think if I had just one minor quibble with this book, I think Duncan winds up accepting everything that's happening way too readily, and maybe at least in the next issue, needs a moment to have a complete mental breakdown just for a page or so, because this is a lot that's being thrown at him. I mean, and he in one fell swoop, he finds out his grandmother has a secret cache of weapons and has been killing vampires apparently and fighting monsters. And then there is a monster and then he's running from it. And somehow he picks up an entire tree trunk and shoves it in the monster's mouth. And the whole thing happens and he doesn't really blink much of an eye, which I thought was a little bit of a letdown in terms of characterization. But on the whole, I felt this issue was strong enough that it didn't detract too much. So
could I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
So I would argue that putting Duncan in there as an academic, as a historian, as an academic myself, we are always prepared to be proven wrong. At any given point in time, we expect that somebody is going to come along and say, everything you understand is wrong, and here's why. So for me, that actually helped me connect with Duncan, because I feel like in the same kind of scenario, that's how I would react. Like, well, got that one wrong. Next. Like, I don't know. It felt genuine to me.
Okay, that's fair. I think on an academic level, I think that works, but on a human level, if my Mimi suddenly had a giant stash of weapons, I'd be alarmed. And then if a big giant snake monster bull thing was staring at me from 20 feet up, I'd probably just piss my pants. But and get eaten. But that's me. Great book. Fantastic. Kieran Gillen's been on a tear lately. Peter Cannon Thunderbolt was awesome. Wicked and the Divine. It's like this. And I feel bad now because I was really dismissive of him based on his Marvel output circa 2012, 2013, none of which I really connected with. So when he left Marvel, I was like, whatever. He was all hype. And evidently I've really been missing out. So now I need to go back and check out Wicdiv and anything else of his that I've missed, because I loved Peter Cannon Thunderbolt. If you didn't read that, it was freaking awesome. And yeah, this looks positioned to be pretty rad as well. So yeah, big point. Question, guys, is this an ongoing or a mini series? Do we know?
This is a 6-issue mini. I just looked that up.
Okay.
But I have the same feeling about this as I do about White Trees, that this is something that could continue on into multiple volumes
For
should
sure.
it
There's
take
so
off,
much
and it already
groundwork
has.
here. And
Mhm.
oh shit. There was one more point I wanted to make, and I'm kind of surprised you guys didn't pick up on this. This is clearly, even though it's not spoken, is saying something about Brexit. Like
Oh
these
yeah.
terrorists that are wanting to resurrect the King Arthur in the time of need, and who also happened to conquer Europe.
Mhm.
Hello, it's about Brexit. So, but it's smart enough that it doesn't beat you over the head with that. Nick?
Yeah, like to that point, I think it hits a lot of these academic and intellectual notes, but I didn't feel like it committed to it. Ultimately, you spend the majority of the book with a grandma with a stash of huge weapons fighting this mythological beast, and that seemed to be what the story was more focused on telling. And then you get the stuff kind of tacked on at the end, and that was kind of how I felt. If it had committed more to that academic approach of the exploration of the subversion of these tropes, then I think it would have succeeded a little bit more. But using grandma with a stash of weapons to fight these beasts, it was a little much. And this is coming off of reading White Trees, which is a wild thing to say, I know. But this one, I think it didn't commit to that approach. You can find it in there, but ultimately it's predicated on you being interested in Duncan and Grandma fighting, you know, going on this adventure together, and that character driven part of it, I thought fell short.
Yeah.
Cody?
So as a counterpoint to that, and you will see the full interview out of this within the next couple of days. But I was speaking to Tom DeFalco recently, and in the interview, one of the things that he made note of was that in every other medium in the American medium complex, they're speeding up. Narrative is speeding up. You can't go 1 minute without something big happening, except for comics. Comics are slowing down. Comics are stretching things out. They're dragging things out. Um, in this case, what we see is a complete story of Duncan and Grandma fighting off a questing beast with other elements that speak to a larger story. And that's an art that is kind of lost in modern comics writing. The ability to tell one complete unit of entertainment, as DeFalco called it. So in that regard, I can totally see why it would be structured that way. Like if this was the only thing you ever read from this series, you still got a complete story. You still got a full-on introduction of Beast, dealing with Beast, moving on to the next thing. Like that is a beginning, middle, and end within the context of a larger story. So, I mean, I can absolutely respect that, and you can look for that review. It should be out tomorrow or Saturday on www.comic-watch.com. Any final parting thoughts on Once and Future?
No.
Buy this comic.
I would
It's
tell
really
you
good.
I would tell you to go to your LCS and buy this comic, but you probably can't. Pick up a second or third or fourth printing. All right, so on to what have you been reading and what are you looking forward to, starting with Matt.
So I read an actual, for real, no joke book this week. It was crazy. It didn't have pictures or anything. It's called A History of Heavy Metal. It's pretty short. It's a little under 300 pages, but it's by a comedian named Andrew O'Neill, and that's kind of what drew me to it. Is he's got a stage show that he does where it's an hour long, and he just talks about this thing that he loves in hilarious terms. And the book translates really well with that. It's a fun, zippy little read, especially if you like the genre. But even if you don't, it's full of funny asides and anecdotes. And he comes up front and says, "I'm not a historian. I'm not a journalist. I love this stuff." So that was it took me like 4 days to get through it. I loved it. I put down my comics. Like, my family was very confused. And other than that, I've been so busy moving that I haven't had time to do a lot of reading. But what I'm looking forward to, since I apparently jinxed Shazam when I mentioned it last week, is I lost it. Sorry, guys. I went completely blank on what I was looking forward to. But we're going to try Shazam again, and hopefully this week it actually ships. Um, Other things that are coming out that I'm really excited about, Guardians of the Galaxy #8 from Donny Cates comes out. Like this book is awesome. It's veering away from just being kind of a advertisement for the movies, which is really good. And under Donny Cates has really started to take on a life of its own and become a little bit more of a respectable property on print than more recent volumes have been, at least in my mind. So that's where I'm at this week. Brian, how about you?
I actually think this week so far, those are the only 2 books that I read. But I think what I'm looking forward to most, probably Batman 77. Nick?
Okay, yeah, so I guess this week I did a little bit of reading on Neil Gaiman's Eternals. I finally made my way through it. Art by John Romita Jr., who you can spot out of a crowd easily. And I'm usually not that big a fan of John Romita Jr.'s stuff, although All-Star Batman I enjoyed, didn't expect to. Most of the character work in this book I didn't care for, but the Celestials, he was an odd but great choice for that. And of course, Neil Gaiman's writing, it works out in the end. The first 3 issues, I believe, I struggled through, and then issue 4 happened, and I was sold for the rest of it. So it was a super fun read, and I'm kind of sad that I've missed out so far, but I definitely enjoyed it. Things I'm looking forward to, I think next week is the new Vampirella #2. We've got, of course, Christopher Priest is the first issue we had a huge debate on, so we're going to follow up on that and see if we can actually do something with this series worthwhile. The Red Sonja Birth of the She-Devil is issue 3, I believe, coming out next week. That should be pretty exciting. But ultimately not a lot from Marvel and DC these days that I'm really pumped for. And I think this show is a sign of that. We've got 2 comics not from Marvel and DC, and what I read came out a few years ago from Marvel. So an interesting sign of the times. Cody?
Yeah, so as for what I've been reading, I've been revisiting Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics in preparation for a new line of columns that'll be coming out at Comic Watch. In this kind of similar vein as McCloud, it's a column that I'll be doing that is about kind of understanding and how to read and how to process comics in some slightly more technical, slightly more comprehensive terms. Like, of course, you can just breeze through a comic and read it, but this is kind of going to delve into a little bit of the kind of more technical aspect of how is this functioning? How is this telling a story? So yeah, I spent a lot of my week reading Understanding Comics and Understanding Comics Comics Revisited, Revisiting Comics. That's the second volume, which doesn't read as well and doesn't age as well as Understanding Comics, unfortunately, because it's written pre-digital comic era, and it's kind of predicting the digital comic era, but it doesn't really get it right. So that's kind of it was interesting to kind of revisit that after, I don't know, was it 15 years since the last time I read it? So that's what I've been reading. As far as what I'm looking forward to, I'm not looking forward to anything really this week. I guess Powers of X3. But just looking through the list of stuff that's coming out, this is not a great week for comics, folks. I'm sorry. When you're dredging down into Vampirella 2 is something that you're looking forward to, things have gone awry somewhere along the way.
For Vampirella.
Hey, I will say Aquaman by Kelly Sue DeConnick comes out this week, and that's been a very undervalued book. But that is it. We lost Cody again. I'm so sorry. That's why I get for not paying attention. So
I'm back.
that is it for this week. Cody, are you back?
I'm back.
Okay,
I had one last little rant I wanted to get off. And it ties into something that Nick was saying. Like, I was talking to the guys at Dragon's Lair about kind of where does DC go from here? What's going on with DC? Like, right now, I feel like DC is stuck in a narrative rut. It seems like they are waiting to launch new initiatives until after Doomsday Clock ends, because that's going to obviously play a major role in the structure of the DC universe moving forward, and we're damn near a year late. So I believe that there are better days ahead for DC, but right now we are in a dark time for them. They're scaling back their books. Right now, most of them are not very good. It's unfortunate, but it's God's honest truth. But it's going to get better. I have faith. I see you hemming and hawing, but think about it. Like, of your flagship books, Action is pretty good. Superman is not. Same writer, but you're 50-50 on Superman books. Batgirl is okay. Supergirl is okay. Flash is terrible to okay, depending on the week. Wonder Woman is bad. Aquaman is great, but nobody cares because everybody's upset that Kelly Sue DeConnick is writing it instead of Danny Abnett. Justice League Origins is bad. Justice League is good, but it's hard to jump in. And I would note that Justice League 29 is a great jumping on point, but it is a convoluted story. There's a lot of moving parts. It's not user-friendly. Justice League Dark is great, but again, not a lot of people are reading it. And then you've got a whole bunch.
And he's gone. Cody White left. Okay, guys, I think we're gonna wrap it up. So yeah, DC bad, Marvel okay, Indies good, in some. This has been episode 41, if I'm not mistaken, of the Comic Watchers Show. Thank you for tuning in. You can check us out all over the internet: Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, Podbean, you name it, we are there. I'm Matt. This is Brian and Nick. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean is Cody. And thank you for tuning in. Bye.
I